Long before men, elves, or monsters walked the continent, there was only sense, a world untouched by chaos, bathed in the Chetsupo rhythm of creation and decay. The land was empty, but not lifeless. Rivers moved like whispers, mountains rose without name, and the winds carried no memory. It was a world before the concept of time, where existence simply was. In this age, there were no boundaries between magic and matter. Reality itself breathed freely, untamed and fluid. Energy moved through the air like invisible tides, forming the essence that later generations would call chaos. But back then it was not yet magic. It was something purer, something older, a pulse at the heart of all things. For countless eons the world drifted through this state of balance. No light, no dark, no life to question its meaning. Yet every quiet age invites disruption. And somewhere in the eternal void beyond this world, other realms stirred. Worlds of fire, shadow and song, each with its own laws, its own inhabitants, and its own hunger to expand. The scholars of Aretusa would one day call this time the Age of Stillness, but to the few who learned to glimpse the past through magical sight, it was something far stranger, the calm before the breaking of worlds. They say the first spark of imbalance came not from the continent, but from the collision of invisible forces beyond mortal understanding. Imagine the weave of existence, millions of threads crossing endlessly across the fabric of the multiverse. When two threads brushed too close, they twisted, tangled and tore. The first rip was small, harmless, but the tear widened. And through that wound came whispers, echoes from beyond, leaking into a world that was not ready to hear them. These echoes weren't voices as we know them. They were frequencies, ripples of will, fragments of foreign souls pressing against the fragile walls of this reality. And slowly, the world began to change. The rivers grew thicker with strange minerals, storms carried lightnings that burned green instead of white, and for the first time things began to move of their own accord. A spark of awareness was born in the land itself. Many millennia later, druids and mages would name this phenomenon the breath of chaos. They believed it was the first sign that their world was not alone, that invisible hands had brushed against it from another plane. From that moment, the balance began to falter. The breath of chaos awakened the first creatures, not yet monsters, but the ancestors of what would come. They were beings of energy without flesh or bone, drifting through the air like shimmering ghosts. They fed on the wild magic that seeped from the earth, glowing faintly in the darkness. They were neither good nor evil, simply curious, exploring a newborn world. For 1,000 ages they thrived unseen and unnamed. But with curiosity came change. Some of these entities learned to shape the energy around them, forming temporary bodies of mist and light. Others grew restless, reaching beyond their world, seeking the echoes they once heard. And somewhere in that reaching, something vast and terrible looked back. The first rupture between worlds was not a single event, but a slow awakening. It began as a hum in the air, then a vibration through the ground. Mountains cracked, skies bled colour, and for the first time portals, thin, invisible membranes between dimensions, began to form. They opened not by intention, but by imbalance. And through those small tears, the first shadows fell upon the continent. No man witnessed this, no elf sang of it, yet the memory of it remained, buried in the foundation of magic itself. Every spell ever cast, every portal ever opened, carries a trace of that ancient moment when chaos was first unleashed. When the mages of later centuries spoke of the conjunction of the spheres, they believed it to be a single cataclysm, the event that brought monsters and men together. But those who studied the deepest ruins of the Keep of Banard whispered of something older, a precursor event, a quiet collision that set the stage for everything to come, the dawn of chaos. It is said that if one could look far enough back through the veil of time, they would see not a world of monsters or humans, but a realm of pure, breathing energy, the heartbeat of the multiverse itself. And perhaps, just perhaps, that heartbeat still echoes beneath the continent. Each time a mage casts a spell, each time chaos is called by name, the world remembers the silence that came before. The silence that once ruled the continent did not last forever. For balance, by its very nature, invites disruption. And the stillness of creation was finally broken by the most violent event in all of existence, the conjunction of the spheres. It began as a tremor no one could feel, a vibration through the very bones of the world spreading outward, invisible, yet unstoppable. The stars above flickered. The air grew heavy, thick with energy that burned the lungs of every living thing. Then came the sound, not thunder, not wind, but a deep, endless roar that tore through the sky. It was as if the universe itself had screamed. In an instant, the walls between worlds shattered. Reality, once whole, split like glass under pressure. And from every direction worlds collided. Some merged for only a heartbeat, others intertwined forever. Across dimensions, light met shadow, order met chaos, and creation became confusion. Through the cracks poured everything that did not belong. Creatures of strange flesh, eyes burning with alien intelligence, beings made of smoke and stone, spectral entities that shimmered like reflections in broken mirrors. Entire races, elves, gnomes, and others far older than man, were thrown violently onto a world that was never meant to hold them. Among these arrivals were the NC, the Elder Elves. Tall, graceful, and filled with magic, they fell upon the continent like stars scattered across night. Their songs told of a world they had lost, a realm of endless light and eternal youth. But here, they found only cold forests and wild seas, a land still raw from the collision. For the first time magic, true, living magic, flowed freely through the air. It was chaos unbound, leaking through the seams between dimensions. The ground itself pulsed with it. Mountains bled light, rivers ran thick with glowing mist, and the sky flickered with ghostly auroras. The very laws of nature began to bend. Things that should not live began to breathe. Things that should not die lingered on. The elves were the first to learn control. They tamed the chaos, shaping it into art, music, and power. Their mastery of the arcane made them gods among the lost races that followed. They built their cities in harmony with the land, marble towers that glowed under twin moons, bridges woven from living roots. It was an age of wonder. But beneath that beauty, the world was still broken. The conjunction had not only brought new life, it had awakened something older, something sleeping beneath the surface. The first monsters, beasts of impossible form born of chaos and suffering, they came crawling from the wounds of the world, from swamps, caves, and mountains. Creatures made not by nature, but by mistake. The elves tried to fight them with song and steel, but the creatures multiplied faster than they could be slain. Some whispered that these abominations were not born of the conjunction at all, though, but of the elves' own experiments, their attempts to bend chaos to their will. Whether truth or legend, one fact remained. The world had become dangerous. The conjunction had turned paradise into a battlefield. And then came the last of the arrivals, the humans. Unlike the elves, they were not born of chaos, nor gifted with immortality. They came later, long after the first storms of magic had calmed. No one knows exactly which world they came from, only that when they arrived, they adapted faster than any before them. They learned quickly, fought ruthlessly, and built kingdoms where others had only survived. The elves called them Dwan, the lesser ones. But what they lacked in grace, they made up for in ambition. They spread across the continent like wildfire, cutting forests, mining mountains, shaping the land to their will. The age of the elves began to fade, and in its place the age of men began to rise. Yet the conjunction never truly ended. It left scars too deep to heal, invisible rifts that still pulse beneath the surface of the world. Sometimes they open again, briefly, letting strange energies spill through. Those moments, mages say, are why the continent never truly stabilizes. Why monsters still appear where none should. Why ghosts still wander places they never lived. Even now, scholars argue about what the conjunction really was. Some claim it was a natural event, a cosmic accident in the dance of worlds. Others whisper it was punishment, or perhaps a design, set in motion by beings far beyond comprehension. But there are older tales, buried deep within the vaults of Aretusa, that speak of something else entirely. They tell of a force behind it, not a storm but a will, an intelligence that chose to break the boundaries between realms, something that hungered for more than one world could offer. And if those ancient whispers are true, then the conjunction was not the end of chaos, it was only its beginning. For every 1,000 years, when the stars align and the skies tremble, the veil weakens again. Mages feel it in their bones. The winds grow restless, creatures grow bolder, and portals flicker in places long thought dead. And each time the same question returns. Will the worlds collide once more? Because if the conjunction was not an accident, but a cycle, then the next collision is not a matter of if, but when. When the storms of the conjunction finally quieted, the continent lay broken. Mountains split open like old wounds, and seas that had never existed now swallowed entire valleys. The air still hummed with the residue of chaos, a faint, shimmering energy that never faded. And through the mist of this newborn world came the first true settlers, the NC, the elves. They did not arrive as conquerors, but as survivors. Thrown violently from their homeworld, the NC'd found themselves scattered across strange lands under unfamiliar stars. They had once ruled a realm of endless twilight where time itself moved slower. But here the sun burned hotter, the nights grew longer, and death, a concept once foreign to them, began to take root. At first they wandered. Their ships lay shattered, their magic unstable. The chaos of this world resisted their control as if it rejected them, like a body rejecting foreign blood. Yet over centuries the elves adapted. They learned to sing to the soil, to coax rivers into bending paths, to weave magic not as lords of power, but as dancers with nature. They built their first homes in forests so ancient that even the trees seemed to remember other worlds. The elves named their new home Elderland, a word that meant both sorrow and renewal. For while they mourned what they had lost, they believed the conjunction was not entirely chance. Many of their sages claimed it was destiny, that their exile served a higher purpose to guide the new world into balance. From their sacred groves they forged the first cities, delicate structures of living wood and pale stone, rising like dreams among the trees. The elves never cut what they could grow, never built where something already lived. To them, creation was harmony, not conquest. Their cities glowed softly at night, powered by crystals humming with chaos energy, and at their centres they planted the great Gladine, trees infused with magic said to sing to the stars. But even in paradise, unease stirred. The elves could feel that this world was not stable. The fabric of reality still trembled from the conjunction, and the chaotic energy around them pulsed unpredictably. Spells sometimes failed, portals opened where none were intended, and occasionally things slipped through, creatures made of light, shadow or hunger, drawn by the same chaos that had once torn the skies apart. To protect themselves, the Ensichi began to study this new magic. Their greatest mages, the Shadishrain, mapped the ley lines, invisible rivers of power that flowed beneath the ground. They believed that if they could understand these currents, they could restore balance and rebuild the order of their lost home. But magic, once studied, always tempts control, and where some elves sought harmony, others sought mastery. A faction within their ranks began experimenting with chaos itself, bending it, shaping it, forcing it to obey their will. They called themselves the Keepers of the Veil, visionaries who claimed they could pierce the boundary between worlds and reclaim the paradise they'd lost. It was their arrogant mats that birthed the first true rift. A portal torn open by elven hands, unstable, violent, and impossible to close. From it poured the first nightmares the continent had ever known. Creatures of raw chaos, half-formed, ever-shifting, their presence poisoning the land around them. Forests blackened overnight, rivers boiled. The elves had unleashed what the conjunction had merely begun. The wars that followed were not fought with armies but with fear. Villages vanished in silence, cities fell under shadows that moved without light. Entire forests turned to glass where the air itself ignited. The elves fought back, but every spell they cast seemed to feed the very energy they sought to destroy. In desperation they sealed the rift, not with power, but with sacrifice. 13 mages gave their lives to bind it, trapping the chaos within a shimmering scar that pulsed like a heartbeat. It would later be known as the Cradle of Storms, a forbidden land where even centuries later the earth still whispered in pain. The NCO emerged victorious, but at a terrible cost. Their numbers dwindled, their harmony fractured, and for the first time they began to question their place in this new world. Some saw the disaster as punishment for arrogance. Others believed it was the will of the stars, that this chaos was meant to shape them into something stronger. In the centuries that followed, the elves retreated deeper into their forests, away from the chaos that had nearly destroyed them. They turned inward, Scholars, dreamers, poets, recording their mistakes in songs and stone so that no one would repeat them. And yet whispers persisted. Some said the keepers of the veil had not all perished, that deep beneath the ruins of their cities, their descendants still studied the old portals, waiting for the day when the worlds would align again. As the elves faded into legend, the land began to heal, slowly, unevenly, like a wound closing over a scar, but the scar never disappeared. It was there, beneath the soil, beneath the rivers and mountains, a memory of power waiting to be awakened once more. And far above, among the cold stars, something watched, silent, patient, and unblinking. Whatever had caused the conjunction was not gone, it was waiting. Centuries passed after the fall of the elves' golden age. Their cities grew silent, swallowed by vines and fog. The songs that once echoed through marble halls became whispers carried only by the wind. The Aensair, weary and diminished, withdrew deeper into their forests, choosing isolation over confrontation. And in that silence the world changed again, for from across the sea, from another shattered realm, came men. They arrived not through portals or chaos, but by ship, sails stretched against foreign winds. To the elves it must have seemed as if ghosts had crawled out of the ocean, bringing with them the scent of iron, smoke, and hunger. No one knew what drove them, famine, war, or perhaps another conjunction that had ruined their world as it once had the elves. But whatever the reason, they came with one purpose, to survey. At first, the elves ignored them. They had seen other creatures arrive since the spheres collided, small tribes, scattered beings that vanished with time. But these newcomers were different. They multiplied quickly, adapted even faster, and within a few short generations, they had built towns where once there had been only trees. The elves watched, half in wonder, half in dread. As these short-lived beings cut into the forests and reshaped the rivers, they forged metal tools, carved roads through sacred ground, and wherever they went, fire followed. The flame of progress, the ember of destruction. The druids called them children of impatience. For while elves measured time in centuries, men thought only of tomorrow. They built quickly, conquered fiercely, and when something stood in their way, they burned it down. At first, the elves tried to teach them, to show them balance, the harmony of life with the land, but men saw no beauty in patience. To them, the world was not sacred, it was opportunity. An opportunity once seen must be taken. Tension grew. The first skirmishes began in the far north, when human settlers cut down the ancient weirwood-like trees that elves held holy. The elves warned them to stop. The humans didn't listen. Blood was spilled, and the forest never recovered. From that spark came a fire that would burn for centuries. The wars between elves and men reshaped the continent again, not through magic or chaos this time, but through steel, ambition, and vengeance. Kingdoms rose upon the ashes of elven cities. The names of those cities faded from memory, replaced by the crowns of humans who would never know what stood there before. The elves retreated further into their sanctuaries, and the few who remained among humans became slaves, mocked for their long lives and fading magic. What once had been a race of near gods became a scattered people, teachers, poets, outcasts. Their sorrow seeped into the songs of the land, and even centuries later, travellers would swear they could hear the music of the lost Aensair when the wind blew through the ruins. Yet the elves were not blameless. Some among them, bitter from loss, began to whisper of revenge. They sought forbidden knowledge, remnants of chaos buried since the first rift was sealed. Deep beneath the mountains, they performed rituals, calling on powers long forgotten, believing they could reclaim their dominion. But what they awakened was not salvation. It was hunger. For in their search for power, they touched something that had never truly died. The dormant energy left from the conjunction, and once stirred, it began to feed again. Storms grew stronger. The earth trembled in its sleep, and out of the wilds came creatures the world had not seen since the age of the first chaos. Monsters. They were not born of nature, nor crafted by magic. They were byproducts of a broken reality, the lingering remnants of other worlds twisted into shapes that defied logic and mercy. Wolves with human faces, serpents that could whisper, things that bled shadows and dreamed in hunger. As these horrors spread across the land, both elves and men suffered alike. For all their differences, both had built homes upon a wounded world, and now that wound was opening once more. The mages, human and elven alike, gathered in panic. They studied the monsters, dissected them, tried to understand what bound them to the chaos. and in their desperation, they discovered something terrible. The energy that created these beasts was the same energy that gave birth to magic itself. To destroy it entirely would mean silencing magic forever. To leave it unchecked would mean extinction. So the mages made a choice. A secret pact, one that would never be spoken aloud. They would not end the monsters. They would control them. Harness the chaos instead of erasing it. Study it. Bend it. Shape it. And from that dark agreement, the seeds of a new order were planted. An order that would one day be called witches. But that is a tale still waiting to be told. For now, the Age of Men had begun, loud, short, and unstoppable. The elves faded into memory. The monsters multiplied in the dark, and above it all, chaos pulsed quietly beneath the surface of the world, patient and eternal, waiting for the next hand bold enough to wield it. In the shadow of war and fire, humanity discovered its oldest obsession: control. They had tamed beasts, forged metal and conquered land, but there was one force they still could not grasp: the strange, humming energy that pulsed beneath the world. The elves had called it chaos. To men it was simply power. For centuries after their arrival, humans feared this invisible current. Those who wandered too close to areas where chaos was strong would fall ill, their minds fracturing under invisible pressure. Some would speak in tongues no one understood. Others would wake screaming from dreams of endless light. And a few, just a few, could move the world with their hands. They were outcasts at first. Villagers called them cursed. Priests called them heretics. When crops failed or storms struck, these touched were blamed and burned. Yet even as their screams faded into smoke, others watched and learned. The first of them to truly understand was a woman whose name history has all but erased. The elves remembered her as Diane Henray, the Mother of Dust. Humans called her Alzur's predecessor. She was not born to nobility nor trained by any master. She simply listened to dunst, to the hum beneath the earth, to the rhythm of storms, to the whispers that came in dreams. Through her, chaos began to take shape. She realized that what men feared was not evil, but raw creation itself. Fire, water, air, and earth, these were not elements. They were instruments, notes of a greater symphony that few could hear. And by tuning her will to that song, she could bend it. The legends say she conjured rain from a clear sky, lit torches with thought, and walked unharmed through flame. But what she saw was not power. It was structure. The energy that had once torn worlds apart could now be harnessed, studied, refined. Chaos could be taught. When word of her feat spread, others came. Outcasts, wanderers, philosophers, all drawn to the promise of understanding. They built their first circle not as a temple but as a refuge, a stone ring carved into a mountaintop where the air shimmered faintly with magic. There they gathered and began to name what had no name. The first schools of sorcery were born, primitive at first, chaotic as the force they studied, but over time order emerged. They discovered that chaos responded to emotion, fear, anger, love, and loss. To cast a spell, one did not simply speak, one felt. A trembling heart could ignite fire more fiercely than 1,000 incantations. Yet with knowledge came danger. As more learned the ways of magic, accidents became common. Entire villages would vanish overnight, swallowed by storms conjured by apprentices who had lost control. The balance between will and restraint became sacred, and those who failed to respect it paid the price in blood. To preserve what they had built, the mages formed a council, the conclave of the first flame. They set down the first laws of magic, rules to bind chaos, not destroy it. Among them were 3 that would endure through the ages. Power is alone. Balance is the price. Those who forget either are lost. Under these principles, the first true mages emerged. No longer cursed wanderers, but scholars, advisors, and architects of kingdoms. They taught rulers to build with wisdom, to use magic for crops, for medicine, for light. And for a brief time, the world flourished. But power never rests quietly in mortal hands. For every mage who sought harmony, another craved dominion. The conclave split into factions, those who saw magic as a gift, and those who saw it as a weapon. The most dangerous of these was a man named Tir Edin, a scholar who believed chaos was not meant to serve life, but to replace it. He taught that every spell, every act of creation was merely a shadow of what chaos could truly do. And in secret, he began his experiments, drawing energy not from the land, but from living souls. His goal was immortality. What he created instead was corruption. They say his first experiment gave birth to something monstrous, a creature of pure magic, without form, without mercy. It fed on life, on the warmth of the world, turning everything it touched into glass and ash. The mages called it Varkolak, a being so ancient and terrible that even the witches of later ages would only speak its name in whispers. To contain it, the conclave had no choice but to act. They united their strength and trapped the creature beneath the ruins of Tir Eden's tower, sealing it behind wards so strong they glowed for centuries. But the damage was done. The world had learned that chaos, once tamed, could never again be truly contained. And so the conclave made a decision that would define the next 1,000 years. They would teach magic, but only to the chosen few. They would watch the balance, guard it, and erase those who dared to twist it again. Thus began the era of controlled sorcery, a fragile piece held together by fear, wisdom, and secrets. The world, for the first time since the conjunction, stood still, but beneath that stillness something pulsed, ancient, patient, and hungry. The chaos had not been destroyed. It had only learned to wait. The mages thought they had brought peace to the world. With their laws, their conclaves, and their carefully chosen apprentices, they believed they had tamed chaos itself. But peace built on power is never more than an illusion. And deep beneath the surface, chaos was already twisting again, shaping horrors in the dark corners of the continent. The first monsters had never truly vanished. They slept in forgotten caves, bred in cursed marshes, waited in silence beneath old ruins. Now, centuries after the conjunction, they began to stir once more. Villages awoke to screams in the night, caravans vanished on empty roads, and rivers ran red with the kind of blood no one could name. The kings called upon mages for help, but the mages were scholars, not soldiers. Their spells could burn armies and move mountains, yet they were slow, deliberate, too refined for chaos-made flesh. What was needed was not intellect, it was precision. And so, from desperation, a new idea was born, a weapon that could fight the unnatural without succumbing to it. The first Witcher. It began as an experiment. A group of renegade mages, exiled from the conclave for distortion of the balance, found a way to infuse living men with controlled chaos. They called it the Trial of Grasses. It was crude, brutal, and often fatal, but for those who survived, the results were undeniable. Their senses sharpened beyond human limits. Their bodies healed from wounds that would kill others. They no longer felt fear, or much else. The mages had created something neither man nor monster, a being of calculation and instinct, cold, efficient, obedient. Their goal was simple: purge the land of beasts. But as always, power breeds ambition. At first, only a handful of witches existed. They hunted alone, moving from village to village, slaying whatever nightmares had crawled out of the old world. In exchange, they demanded payment: gold, food, anything that proved value. To the common folk, they were saviors one day and devils the next. Monsters killing monsters, tools of chaos forged in chaos. Over time, their numbers grew. Each generation of mages refined the process, making the mutations more stable, the training more precise. The witches became an order, bound by discipline, strengthened by ritual. They built their fortress in the cold north, Kaer Morhen, a citadel carved into the mountains, unreachable except by those who knew the path. Here, children were brought, abandoned, orphaned, or sold to undergo the trials. Most did not survive. Those who did were changed forever. Within Kaer Morhen's stone halls, new witches were trained in the arts of alchemy, swordsmanship, and monster lore. They learned to read the signs of beasts, to brew potions that burned their veins but granted inhuman strength. They became living weapons, emotionless, precise, efficient. Each witcher bore the medallion of his school: the wolf, the cat, the bear, the griffin, and other diadems lost to time. Each symbolized a philosophy, a way of surviving in a world that no longer had a place for gods, but not all agreed with their existence. The conclave of mages, once proud of their creation, began to fear it. Rumours spread that witches were mutating further on their own, that chaos was evolving within them, making them unpredictable, dangerous, too close to the monsters they hunted. The kings who once paid for their service now saw them as liabilities. Whispers of rebellion grew in the courts of men, and the halls of magic alike, and yet the witches endured, because the monsters did not stop. Each winter the creatures grew bolder, each spring new horrors crawled from forgotten corners of the world. Witches became a necessary evil, despised but needed. They were the wall between civilization and chaos. Their creed was simple: we kill monsters so that others may sleep. No politics, no faith, no allegiance, only the contract, the coin and the code. But beneath the stoic silence of their order lay something darker, a question none dared ask aloud. If witches were forged from chaos to fight chaos, how long before the two became the same? Some witches began to feel it, a restlessness, a whisper in the dark. They claimed to hear the pulse of the world beneath their feet, the same hum that once drove mages to madness. And in that hum they felt recognition. The monsters they killed, the chaos they fought, it was a reflection of what they were becoming. Still they carried on, because in a world born of collision and betrayal, purpose was the only thing that separated man from beast. As the centuries turned, Kaer Morhen's fires burned through countless winters. Its halls echoed with steel and screams, and its walls were lined with the names of those who had survived the trials. Few ever visited that fortress, but travellers who passed near the mountain spoke of strange lights and colder winds, as if the world itself held its breath each time another child entered the gates. The age of mages was fading. The age of witches had begun, and yet the balance still trembled. Because while men fought monsters, something greater, something older, watched from beyond the veil. Chaos had found new vessels, new instruments of survival, and through them it would learn. It always did. High in the blue mountains, where the wind cuts through the rocks like blades, stands a fortress carved from silence itself. Kaer Morhen, its name means Keep of the Sea of Ghosts, though no sea ever reached its gates. Only snow, mist, and the memories of screams. It is said that when the mages first built it, they didn't choose the location. It chose them. The air there hums differently, dense with the residue of old chaos. The stone beneath the keep pulses faintly at night, as if the mountain remembers every life changed or lost within its walls. Kaer Morhen was not made for comfort, it was made for transformation. Within its cold halls, the mages constructed laboratories, training yards, and chambers lined with symbols no man outside their order could read. The fortress became a crucible where boys entered as humans and emerged as something else. The witches. The process began with the trial of grasses. Children were stripped of name and past, given only a number. They drank alchemical brews made from monster blood, powdered silver, and chaos-infused herbs. For days they screamed, their bodies breaking and rebuilding themselves under the weight of unnatural power. Most did not survive. Those who did no longer remembered what it meant to feel fear or warmth. After the trials came training: swordsmanship, alchemy, monster anatomy. Each lesson delivered not with pride but necessity. For a witcher was not meant to live, only to endure. They were taught to fight in summons, to think in patterns, to read movement the way mages read magic. Every heartbeat, every breath, every step was part of a rhythm that turned survival into instinct. But Kaer Morhen was more than a forge. It was a vault of secrets. Beneath the training halls, sealed behind heavy stone doors, lay rooms that even the witches were forbidden to enter. There, the mages conducted their darker experiments, refining mutations, recording the limits of the human body. Some whispered that deep below the fortress, the original chaos crystals from the conjunction were buried, still glowing with unspent power. Others said the mages had learned to trap chaos in flesh, creating not witches but prototypes, abominations too unstable to survive daylight. Whatever truth lies buried there, the witches never spoke of it. Perhaps they did not know, perhaps they did not want to. In time, Kaer Morhen became more than a fortress. It became legend. Travellers passing through the mountains would see flickers of firelight through the snow and speak of white-haired ghosts training beneath the moon. Children were told stories of the silver-eyed men who could hear a monster's heart before it attacked. Some called them saviours, others called them cursed. And maybe both were true, because within those stone walls the witches began to lose what little humanity remained. The endless training, the potions that dulled emotion, the rituals that bound them to their code. Each year, fewer of them remembered why they fought. Each year, more became hollow, living tools waiting for coin. Yet even within the coldest walls, a spark endured. Among the witches of the wolf school, one figure began to question. He asked not what they killed, but why. He wondered whether the monsters outside the gates were any worse than those within. The others mocked him at first, until the day he returned from a contract and refused payment. He buried the gold in the snow and whispered, "Some things aren't worth the price." His name, like the first witches, was lost to time, but his defiance planted a seed, and centuries later in another age, another witcher with white hair and golden eyes would walk the same halls and feel that same question stir within him. Geralt of Rivia would not be the first to doubt, or he would only be the first to survive it. But before his age, Kaer Morhen still stood proud, isolated but alive. The mages who had once guided the witches were gone, driven out or killed during the purges that swept the continent. Only the witches remained, guarding their fortress against men as much as monsters. And though they claimed neutrality, the world had not forgotten their origins. Villages whispered of disappearances near the mountains. Scholars muttered that the witches' alchemy had grown darker. Some said they were no longer hunting beasts, but making them. Whether truth or superstition, Kaer Morhen became a place of fear again. Few dared approach it, and those who did never returned the same. Inside, the witches continued their works, forging new hunters, brewing new potions, perfecting their craft in solitude. But the walls were old, and the stones were tired. Each winter, fewer torches burned. Each spring, fewer blades rang in the yard, and then, one night, the mountains burned. No one knows who came, a mob, an army, perhaps a rival order of sorcerers. But Kaer Morhen fell. The laboratories were shattered, the archives burned, the mutagens spilled into the soil. Those who survived scattered across the world, carrying their medallions like ghosts of a dying age. The keep that had once forged monsters to fight monsters became a tomb, its name carved into the wind, its secrets buried in snow and silence. Yet even ruin does not erase purpose. For somewhere deep beneath those broken stones, the mountain still hums with that same low pulse, the rhythm of chaos. And each winter, when the snow falls heavy, some travellers swear they see a faint light flicker in the fortress again, as if Kaer Morhen still remembers. They call it a trial, but no one is judged, only broken. Inside the vaulted chambers of Kaer Morhen, beneath the frozen courtyards and cracked sigils, the alchemists prepare the vials. Green, gold and black, the colours of death and rebirth. Each flask hums softly, alive with the residue of chaos. Outside, the wind howls through the mountains. Inside, children wait. No prayers are spoken, no names are recorded. The witcher's path begins not with glory, but surrender. The body must die for the weapon to awaken. The mixture, part mutagen, part venom, part living subcinian spell, is poured slowly into their veins. It sears through bone and marrow, rewriting what nature once decided. Their hearts stutter, their eyes cloud white, their screams echo through the stone. Of every 10 who drink, perhaps one survives. The rest are burned-out candles, extinguished so that one might burn forever. Those who endure emerge changed. Their eyes become the colour of molten metal. Their pupils contract like a cat's, sensing light where there is none. Their muscles harden, their blood slows, their emotions dull. Pain becomes memory. Fear becomes calculation. They are no longer boys. They are instruments. But the trial of grasses is more than mutation. It is indoctrination. For when the body changes, so too must the mind. In the days that follow, they are fed potions that twist perception, hallucinations designed to break what remains of humanity, visions of the monsters they will hunt, the innocence they will lose, the eternity of wandering without belonging. Only those who accept that emptiness survive the second week. Only those who stop asking why ever see the open sky again. The mages record everything. They measure heartbeat, temperature, the rate at which sanity dissolves. They tell themselves it is science. They tell themselves it is progress. But beneath every calculation hides a truth they will not speak. This is not creation. It is sacrifice. Each witcher carries the ghosts of those who failed. Every movement, every kill, every breath is a monument to the screams buried under the snow. As centuries pass, the process refines but never softens. The alchemical formula changes with each school. The wolf, the bear, the cat, moi, but the purpose remains the same. Perfection through suffering. A witch's body becomes a cage for chaos, balanced only by will. Too much emotion and the fire consumes them, too little and they become hollow. Between those extremes lies the razor's edge on which every witcher walks. Some claim the mutation steals the soul. Others say it purifies it, burning away weakness until only purpose remains. The witchers themselves never answer. Perhaps they no longer know. Perhaps they have learned that words cannot define what the body remembers in pain. There are rumours, always rumours, that a few among them sought to end the trials, that they dreamed of training hunters without destroying them, but none succeeded. Without the trial, there is no witcher. Without suffering, there is no survival. It is the cruel symmetry of their existence, the law of balance made flesh. When the last vial is emptied and the last scream fades, silence returns to Kaer Morhen. The survivors kneel in the courtyard, eyes glazed, skin pale as ash. The medallions are placed around their necks, cold metal against colder hearts. From that moment, they belong to no kingdom, no faith, no family, only to the path, and the path does not forgive. Outside the keep, the wind carries their first breath as witchers down into the valleys. Somewhere below, villagers will speak of salvation, of silver swords and monsters slain. None will ever imagine what it cost. For in the mountains above, under the weight of stone and snow, the fortress hums with the faint echo of their transformation, a lullaby of agony that never truly ends. And when night falls, and the stars hang frozen above Kaer Morhen, the air still shivers with that quiet refrain, science or sacrifice. Does it matter when both lead to the same place? The witchers believed they had conquered every monster the continent could birth. They had catalogued claws, mapped fangs, measured venom and fear, but the worst things that stalked the night did not crawl from caves. They came from the sky, shadows made of frost and echo, and they rode the wind like ghosts made flesh. They called themselves the NL, elves from a world untouched by the decay of men. To mortals, they became legend, the wild hunt. Riders who swept across the skies on horses that burned with cold fire, stealing souls vanishing into mist. Parents told stories of them to quiet restless children. Villagers lit candles when the temperature dropped without reason. But those who had seen them, truly seen them, never spoke again. Long before witchers or kings, before men had even carved borders, the NL had ruled their own realm, a kingdom of eternal twilight. When the conjunction tore open the boundaries between worlds, they discovered the cracks and never forgot them. While the Ensi, their cousins, were exiled to the continent, the NL learned to travel freely. They mastered the space between realities, crossing through portals as easily as breathing. Where others saw chaos, they saw opportunity. For centuries they watched the continent from afar. They saw its wars, its monsters, its endless hunger for power. And when the veil between worlds thinned once more, they crossed. Not to conquer, not yet, but to harvest. They came for what only this world possessed. Life unbound by magic, souls still warm with chaos's pulse. The first sightings were during the long winter. Shepherds found their flocks frozen mid-step, their eyes wide with terror and their bodies untouched. Tracks led into the air, vanishing where the sky shimmered faintly blue. Then came the disappearances. Whole villages gone, doors left open, fires still burning. And on the horizon, riders, cloaked in mist, galloping through storms that obeyed their will. To the mages of the conclave it was heresy, the idea of travellers from other worlds. But to the witchers who lived by steel and blood, it was simply another contract. Till they saw the hunt themselves. Steel shattered against the rider's armour. Signs and potions meant nothing. Blades passed through them as through smoke. The witchers who survived said the air itself screamed when the riders approached, as though reality was being torn apart by their passage. No one knew their purpose. Some believed they were collectors of souls, taking the dead to some frozen afterlife. Others said they sought the elder blood, the lineage that could open worlds as easily as doors. But a few, those who had studied the ancient elven texts, suspected the truth was more complex, and far more terrifying. The NL were dying. Their world, perfect and timeless, was unravelling. Its magic was fading, its sky dimming. To survive, they needed new blood, new worlds to draw from, and so the wild hunt became their salvation. Each raid brought back prisoners, not as trophies but as fuel. The NL harvested life itself, feeding their realm with the essence of those they stole. The Witchers could not stop them, for how does one fight what does not belong to this world? Kaer Morhen's archives filled with failed attempts, runes to close portals, potions to pierce the veil, sigils that shattered, the moment they touched air colder than death. Even the mages of Aretuza abandoned their research, calling the hunt an echo of the conjunction itself, a wound that will never heal. Yet the Wild Hunt's visits were not random. They always came when chaos stirred, when portals flickered, when mages toyed with forbidden spells. It was as if they could smell imbalance. And so, whenever the veil weakened, the Witchers would ride to the edges of the world, to watch the skies and wait. They called it the silent vigil. No contracts, no payment, only watchfulness. Because when the Wild Hunt rode again, no gold would matter, only survival. And still, through the centuries, stories grew. A king who made a pact with the riders to conquer his enemies, only to vanish on his wedding night. A mage who claimed to have followed them into the rift, and returned decades later unchanged, whispering of crystal cities in frozen skies. And a prophecy carved into the walls of a ruined temple. When the riders come not for the few but for the one, the world shall bleed together once more. The Witchers didn't believe in prophecy, but they believed in patterns, and they knew every cycle begins again. When the frost thickens in summer, when torches refuse to burn, and when the sky hums with that old familiar tone of chaos, the hunt rides once more. Even in an age ruled by swords and steel, it was a whisper that people feared most. The world would end in frost. It began as a single vision, a cry from a dying elf named Ithlin Egli, Ep Evinian. Her eyes burned with white fire. Her voice trembled as if carried by the wind itself. Those who were there said she spoke in two tongues at once, to one of the living, one of the stars, and her words would shape every age that followed. The time of the white frost is upon us. The world will perish beneath ice and shadow. Only the blood of the elder shall renew it. At first, the prophecy was dismissed as madness, an old elf's dying dream, a metaphor for decline. But then the winters began to lengthen. The rivers froze sooner, harvests failed, and every century the frost crept a little farther south. Scholars of Aretuza and Banard tried to explain it. They spoke of climate, of magic, of the imbalance left by the conjunction. But the elves, especially the few who still remembered Ithlina's name, whispered of something deeper, a wound in time itself. The conjunction had not only broken worlds, it had broken the rhythm of existence. The white frost was not weather. It was a cycle, a cosmic reckoning that would one day consume everything that drew breath. In their despair, the elves searched for hope in the same place Ithlin had pointed, the Elder Blood. They traced it through generations, following the line of Lara Dorren, an NL sorceress who had defied her people and fallen in love with a human mage. From their union came a child, the first bearer of a power unlike any other, the ability to open worlds, to bend the veil between realms, to move through time as easily as through space. The elves believed this child, and her descendants, carried the key to salvation. Through the Elder Blood, they could flee the frost, escape to another world before this one froze into silence. But humanity had its own designs. Kings coveted the prophecy, mages dissected it, and soon, what had been a whisper of survival became a race for control. The Elder Blood became legend, a curse and a promise. Those who carried it were hunted, studied, worshipped. Some were forced into breeding programs, others vanished before they could speak their names aloud. And through all of it, the frost crept closer. By the time witches walked the earth, the prophecy had become scripture. To the common folk, it was simple. One day the sky would break and the snow would never melt. But to the scholars who still dared to look, there was more. They found references to doorways that would open again, worlds colliding once more as they had during the first conjunction, and the key always was blood. Not strength, not magic, blood. Even the Wild Hunt spoke of it. In the coldest corners of the continent, where portals still flickered like dying stars, the NL whispered that the frost was not destruction, but purification. They sought the Elder Blood not to flee it, but to control it, to steer the cycle rather than be consumed by it. They believed the one who bore that gift could reshape destiny itself. And so, while kingdoms rose and fell, while witches fought their endless wars against monsters and men, prophets and dreamers looked north, to the lands where the sun no longer rose in winter, and waited. Because Ithlin's words were not about fire or ice, they were about balance. Every age of creation must end so another may begin. Every dawn demands a night before it. And somewhere in the future, or perhaps in the past, a child would be born who could decide which came first. A child whose veins sang with the song of worlds. A child who could open the path not only to escape, but to rebirth. The Witchers never spoke of prophecy. They believed only in what could bleed and what could die. Yet even they knew that something stirred beyond their reach, a cold so vast it could not be killed with steel. They called it simply the end, and when the frost finally came, they vowed they would meet it not with prayer, but with swords drawn. For if chaos had begun their world, then perhaps only chaos could decide how it would end. Long before the prophecy reached human tongues, the elves already knew the truth. Power does not vanish, it migrates. Like a river finding new channels, chaos finds new vessels to flow through. And in the wake of the conjunction, that current settled into one bloodline, the line of Lara Doran Epsiadal. Lara was no ordinary elf, born of the NLA, but schooled among the NC. She was both exile and visionary. She saw the frost not as an ending, but as a cleansing, a moment when worlds could merge and be reborn. She believed the key to salvation was not escape, but unity, and in defiance of her kin, she sought to bridge the gap between elves and men. Her love for a human mage, Cregennan of Lod, was not a scandal. It was a declaration. Through their union, Lara believed she could weave the divided worlds into one thread again. But the old orders feared her vision. To the ANL, she was a traitor who diluted sacred blood. To humans, she was a danger, a creature too powerful, too foreign, too free. When she became pregnant, both sides hunted her. They called her unborn child the abomination of chaos. The elves called it a sin, the mages called it a weapon. Only Lara called it hope. She fled through forests that remembered the first storms, hiding among ruins left from the time before men. But the hunt found her. Not the wild riders, but those loyal to her own people. Cornered on the cliffs above the river Yaruga, Lara fought not with spells, but with the will of creation itself. They say the sky burned white that night, and when the dawn came, the mountains themselves had cracked. Lara was gone. Her child survived. The child was found by humans, raised in secret, renamed, forgotten by history. But her blood, tainted with both elven grace and human chaos, carried something unique. It could shape the world. Her descendants became kings, queens, sorcerers, and soldiers, each generation weaker in form yet stronger in potential. The blood thinned, but its echo never faded. Mages called it Hen Iker, elder blood. It was not simply magic, it was the pattern of the conjunction itself encoded in flesh. Those who bore it could open the old paths between worlds, and in dreams they could hear the hum of chaos whispering beneath the stars. For centuries the conclaves sought them, some to protect, others to exploit. The Lodge of Sorceresses, in particular, saw the elder blood as a tool to restore balance, or perhaps dominance. To them, prophecy was not destiny, it was a puzzle to be solved. If the frost was coming, then the bearer of the blood could command it, or stop it. But no prophecy ever yields to control. Every attempt to manipulate the elder blood ended in tragedy. Children born too early, mages consumed by their own experiments, and always the same whispers afterward. The blood remembers. The blood resists. Through the centuries the line thinned, hiding itself in human kingdoms, until no one could trace it, no one but the hunt. The NL, patient as frost, waited across worlds. They felt the pulse of the blood through dimensions, a familiar rhythm calling them home, and when they finally returned, it was not to destroy but to reclaim. They believed the child of prophecy, the descendant of Lara Doran, would open the path once more, not through spell or ritual, but through inheritance. The Witchers, of course, cared nothing for bloodlines, but they could feel it. In the balance of the world, in the way chaos stirred without warning. Something old was awakening again, not in the mountains, not in the ruins, but in a child. A girl whose cry would shake both prophecy and logic alike. Her name would echo through time, not as royalty nor as sorceress, but as Cyrilla Fiona Ellen Rhiannon, child of the elder blood, destined not to flee the frost but to confront it. But destiny, as the witches say, is a sword with no hilt, and those who grasp it bleed. It begins quietly, as all endings do, a morning colder than it should be, a breath turning to mist before dawn. The birds fall silent first, then the rivers slow, and the world exhales a single sigh that never seems to end. The scholars call it a weather anomaly, the mages call it a magical imbalance, but those who still remember Ithlin's prophecy know better. The white frost is not a season, it is a sentence. Long ago the elves spoke of it not as destruction, but as migration, a wave of absolute cold moving from world to world, consuming each in turn before moving on to the next. A force older than the conjunction itself, a remnant of whatever chaos existed before creation had names. In the deepest corners of their libraries, the NL recorded the frost's path. Worlds frozen solid, time halted mid-heartbeat, entire skies turned to crystal. They believed it travelled through the same cracks that the conjunction had opened, and that someday those cracks would lead here. But the frost is not only ice, it is memory. It remembers what a world was before life, before warmth, before light learned how to burn. It does not hate, it restores. It does not kill, it resets, and in that indifference lies its horror. For centuries the frost was only myth. Then came the signs, a mage in Kavir who froze mid-incantation, his spell half-formed in air, a ship found adrift in the Pontar, its crew encased in perfect ice untouched by decay, and nights where the auroras danced blood-red over Toussaint's vineyards. Each time the mages swore it was coincidence. Each time the witches felt that hum again, the low pulse beneath the world, the same one they had heard when chaos was first born. Some believed the frost could be fought, that if the elder blood truly held the pattern of creation, it could reverse the rhythm, warm the pulse again. Others said the opposite, that the blood's purpose was not to stop the frost but to guide it, to lead existence into its next form. Salvation or extinction, and both paths ended the same way. And so the world turned colder. Empires waged wars as if fire could delay fate. Mages burned forests, seeking warmth that no longer answered. And far away, hidden among the ruins of Sintra, a girl with ashen hair and eyes like emerald fire began to dream of snow. Cyrilla did not yet understand what lived inside her veins, but the frost did. It whispered to her through the cracks of the world, calling her by names older than speech. Each time she ran, the air grew colder. Each time she fought, the wind screamed her name. The witches tried to protect her, but even Caer Morhen's stone could not hold back the chill. Frost formed on the walls, the fire would not catch, and in the silence between her heartbeats, they all felt it. The slow, patient rhythm of inevitability. The white frost was not coming. It was already here, waiting. The girl does not remember when the dreams began, only that they were always cold. She runs through forests that no longer breathe, over rivers that mirror the stars, and every step leaves frost behind. Sometimes she hears voices, distant, overlapping, echoing across worlds. Some call her saviour, some call her curse, and all of them whisper the same word: return. Cyrilla Fiona Ellen Rhiannon, born of prophecy, hidden by fate, child of a fallen kingdom, heir to chaos itself. Her blood carries the same melody that once sang through Lara Doran's veins, the pulse that binds worlds together. She does not yet know what she is, but the world does, and it begins to move against her. After Sintra's fall, she flees through the ruins of a war-torn continent. Behind her, soldiers hunt her for her lineage. Ahead of her, portals flicker open, whispering promises she does not understand. And somewhere between one breath and the next, time begins to bend. The witches find her half dead in the snow. Geralt carries her to Caer Morhen, a ghost of a fortress where silence weighs heavier than steel. There, the witches teach her their ways, not because she is destined, but because she must survive. Sword forms, alchemy, discipline. But what they cannot teach her is how to silence the hum in her blood. At night, when the winds howl, the mountains echo with that same vibration the mages once called chaos. And when she dreams, she sees the white frost, endless, patient, calling her by name. In her sleep she walks between worlds, one of eternal twilight ruled by riders with eyes of glass, one of lightless oceans where the stars float beneath the waves, and another world, frozen, silent, absolute, where time itself has stopped. She feels the pull of each, as though the universe itself were trying to decide where she belongs. But the truth is crueler. She does not belong anywhere. She is the bridge between all. The mages learn of her survival soon enough. To them, she is not a girl, she is a vessel, a key to every door, a weapon against every prophecy. They argue whether to protect her or use her, but both choices lead to the same end. For the elder blood does not obey reason, it obeys rhythm, and that rhythm is accelerating. Geralt feels it too. He watches as frost gathers on her fingertips when she grows angry, as shadows flicker in her wake when she runs. He knows that if the world discovers her, it will either worship her or burn her. And so he does the only thing a witcher can do, he runs with her. Through mountains and marshes, across kingdoms that crumble behind them, they flee not from men, but from inevitability. Everywhere they go, time distorts. Seasons twist. People they meet forget days, years. Men look at her and swear they've seen her before, in dreams, in myths, in lifetimes that never happened. Ciri begins to realize the truth. The frost does not chase her. It follows her, because it is her. In the ruins of Skellige, she meets a seer who has waited her entire life for this moment. The woman's eyes are pale, her breath visible even in warmth. She tells Ciri, "You are not the child who will end the world. You are the child the world ends for." Then she smiles and turns to ice before Ciri can ask what she meant. From that day forward, the girl no longer runs from time, she runs through it. Each step she takes ripples through centuries. She sees Kaer Morhen as it once was, alive, burning with light. She sees Lara Dorren on the cliffside, whispering to her unborn child. She sees worlds collapsing into frost and reborn from flame. And through it all she feels something watching her. Ancient, formless, infinite. The frost. The end at the beginning, waiting for her choice. The frost had begun to whisper again. Long before anyone saw them, the world felt them. The sudden stillness before a storm. The trembling of torches in windless rooms. The silence of crows. It was said the wild hunt rode only in winter, but now they came when the sun still burned. The sky split open without warning, and from its wound poured riders cloaked in spectral ice. They came not for war, but for her. Ciri had grown into her power. She no longer stumbled through portals or trembled at visions, but each time she touched her gift, the fabric of the world stretched thin, and something on the other side reached back. The hunt could sense her across dimensions, like wolves catching the scent of blood through snow, and this time they would not let her go. Their king, Eredin Breac Glass, led the charge. His armour shone like shattered starlight, his eyes the colour of frozen oceans. Once he had been a general among the Aenel, noble, loyal, unyielding. Now he was a revenant bound to purpose, to reclaim the elder blood and lead his dying world to salvation. To him Ciri was not prey. She was destiny, their salvation, their queen, the one who could reopen the paths between worlds. Wherever she went, the hunt followed, not through armies or roads, but through the seams of reality itself. Villages would wake to the sound of hooves above the clouds. Ice would form on windows, flowers would turn to glass, and in the distance a red light, the gateway between realms, would burn like a wound in the sky. The witchers fought where they could, but swords are useless against ghosts. Geralt learned this the hard way on the shores of Ard-Skellig, where the riders descended upon them like shadows given form. The very air froze as Eredin's gaze met his. "Step aside, Witcher," the king said, voice echoing in both minds and air. "She belongs to the stars, not to you." But Geralt did not move. For the first time he saw something beneath the frost, a flicker of desperation. Eredin was not merely hunting, he was begging, and that made him dangerous. Ciri fled again, not through roads, but through time. She stepped into moments like doorways, slipping through the centuries that had shaped the continent. One step in the past, one in the future, and still, the hunt was there, always a heartbeat behind. In one world she saw them frozen mid-gallop, trapped between seconds. In another, they were already waiting, their leader motionless, his hand outstretched as if he had known exactly where she would appear. That was when she understood. The hunt was not chasing her through time, they were chasing her across it. Different moments, same pursuit. They were following her echo. Each encounter left the world scarred. Mountains cracked, rivers boiled under sudden frost. Entire villages vanished into rifts that glowed like dying stars. And above it all, Eredin's voice echoed. You cannot run from what you are, Zirael. You are the key, and the key must return home. But Ciri no longer believed in destiny. Every prophecy, every ancient law had been written by someone who thought they could tame chaos, and chaos obeyed no one. So she made her choice. If the hunt sought their queen, she would not be taken. She would meet them on her own terms. In the ruins of Torlara, the Tower of the Gull, she stood alone beneath a storm that split the sky. The air itself shimmered, bending around her. When the riders came, they did not gallop from the horizon. They emerged like thoughts forming from ice. Eredin raised his sword. Ciri raised her hand, and for a heartbeat, two worlds touched. The witches say the sky burned white that night. The mages claim entire constellations vanished, but those who were there, the few who survived, spoke of a silence so deep it seemed to erase sound itself. When the light faded, the hunt was gone. So was Ciri, Torlara, the Tower of the Gull. It stands where the land ends and the sea forgets its name, a spire of ancient stone, older than any kingdom, older than elves, older perhaps even than the conjunction itself. It is said that its foundations were not built but grown, pulled from the bones of the earth by the rhythm of chaos. No map dares to mark its true location. Because the tower is not bound by place, it moves. Sometimes it appears as ruins on a cliff above the great sea. Sometimes as a reflection in waters that hold no reflection. And sometimes only in dreams, but always it calls to one soul at a time. And when Ciri stepped into its shadow, the air itself changed. The ground trembled, not from weight but from memory. Each stone hummed with the echoes of those who had tried to open its doors before. Mages, fools, seekers, all drawn by the same promise. Knowledge, power, escape, don't return. For Torlara is not a doorway. It is the hinge on which every world turns. Ciri felt it before she saw it. A vibration deep in her chest, like the pulse of her own blood answering a call older than time. As she approached, the wind began to move against her. 1,000 unseen voices whispering the same question. Will you open it again? She placed her hand on the stone. It was cold yet alive, and beneath her touch runes flared, and symbols that even the oldest elven scholars had forgotten. The walls shimmered, and the air folded in on itself. Torlara was waking. Inside, there were no corridors, no chambers, only light and movement. It felt like standing inside a heartbeat stretched across eternity. Every step Ciri took became two, every breath 1,000 possibilities branching outward. She saw reflections of herself, not illusions but versions. Some young, some old, some wearing crowns, others cloaked in ash. Each carried a different fate, and all looked back at her with the same eyes, the eyes of someone who has already chosen. In that moment, time ceased to be a line. It became a circle, and she was standing at its centre. Then came the voices, not from outside but from within. Lara Doran's voice, soft, sorrowful, echoing through blood and memory. Child of my line, do you understand what you carry? Ciri tried to answer, but words dissolved into wind. Another voice followed, colder and sharper than the ancient. The frost is not your enemy. It is your inheritance. The light around her began to show curves, white to blue, blue to silver, silver to nothing. She felt herself falling, but there was no ground, only the hum of chaos growing louder until it became silence. And then she saw them, the riders, the wild hunt, but not as they had appeared before, not armoured, not spectral. They were people, the Enel standing before her unmasked. Their king, Eredin, stepped forward, no longer a phantom, but a man. He spoke softly. Welcome home, Zirael. Ciri's breath froze in her chest. The tower wasn't a trap, it was a bridge, and the hunt hadn't chased her through worlds, she had led herself to them. Eredin told her the truth then, or at least his truth. that his world was dying, that the frost consumed everything, light, magic, memory, that only through her could they escape to a new dawn. He offered her a crown of crystal and silver, not a prison, but a promise. "Join us," he said, "and the worlds will survive." For a moment she wavered. She saw what he offered, unity, purpose, peace, but beneath the words she heard something else, a rhythm, familiar and haunting, the same pulse that had always followed her. The frost. It wasn't dying, it was calling, and Eredin wasn't trying to escape it, he was serving it. Ciri stepped back. The tower began to shudder. The runes flared again, burning through time. Eredin reached for her, but she was already gone. The witches say that when she vanished, the sea beneath Tor Lara turned to glass, the tower's light dimmed, and for the first time in centuries the air was still. But in the silence, if one listened closely, they could still hear a faint echo, a single heartbeat, drifting between worlds, waiting to return. There are moments when the universe holds its breath, when time falters, and even chaos seems to listen. Tor Lara was one of those moments. The tower's walls had vanished. Space folded inwards, collapsing into a single pulse of light. Where Ciri once stood, there was now only energy. Raw, living, violent. It spread across the world like a second sunrise. Mountains cracked, stars dimmed, and the veil between worlds began to tear once more. The conjunction was happening again, but this time it was not an accident of fate, it was an act of will. The witches, scattered across the continent, felt it first. Their medallions trembled as if sensing something older than fear. In Aretuza, glass shattered in towers that had stood for centuries. The mages screamed as their spells turned against them, each one hearing the same distant voice whisper through the ether. A child's voice, calm and cold, "I'm not running anymore." Ciri's power did not open one path. It opened all of them. Worlds folded upon beyond worlds. Echoes blending into echoes. The skies bled colours no eye had seen since the first conjunction. From every horizon, rifts bloomed like stars. Through them came things that had no shape, beasts of shadow, spirits of ice, and memories that were never meant to return. The humans called it the second collision. The elves called it the echo of Lara Doran. The witches, they simply called it the end. Geralt stood on the cliffs of Kaer Morhen, watching as the auroras twisted above the mountain, turning night into something that looked like dawn. He could feel her presence, not near, but everywhere. Ciri had become part of the current that binds all worlds. She was no longer a traveller between realms. She was the path itself. The mages tried to contain it. They gathered in circles, chanting words that had once shaped kingdoms, but their magic shattered like glass. The laws they had written, those sacred rules to bind chaos, were melting away. The world had become fluid again, like the moment before creation when everything was possible, and nothing yet had a name. The Wild Hunts saw their chance. From their broken world they crossed through the widening rifts, their armour glowing like frozen suns. They sought not to conquer now, but to merge, to ride the wave of chaos and survive whatever came next. Eredin called out to her once more across the storms of reality. "Ziriel, close it, or we all burn!" But even he knew it was too late. The frost was already feeding on the energy, spreading through the fractures like veins of ice and glass. Ciri stood between worlds, a silhouette suspended in blinding light. She could see them all, the dying forests of the continent, the frozen spires of the Enel realm, and beyond them, endless darkness filled with the heartbeat of the frost. Every choice lay before her now. She could seal the rift and let the frost consume only this world, preserving the rest. Or she could open it completely, letting all realities merge, burning away the old to birth something new. And in the silence between those possibilities, she heard Geralt's voice, distant, quiet, human. "You decide, girl, but remember, nothing pure survives forever." Ciri closed her eyes. The wind died, and the world began to move again. No one knows what she chose. Some say she closed the rift and vanished with it. Others believe she opened it. That every snowstorm since carries her echo, a reminder that the frost never truly ends. But all agree on one thing. When the storm passed, the stars were not where they had been. When the light faded, the world was wrong. The sky was familiar, yet rearranged. Constellations fractured and scattered like shattered glass. The air was heavy, slow, as if it carried memory instead of breath. And in that stillness, humanity realized what had happened. The frost had passed, but it had not left. The seas froze in patterns no wind could carve. Forests stood petrified mid-motion, leaves suspended in mid-air, birds silent, rivers frozen mid-fall. Time itself had splintered. In one valley, dawn stretched on forever. In another, night refused to end. It was neither peace nor death. It was pause. The scholars of the New Age would later call it the interregnum of silence. But to those who survived, it was simply the after. The witches, few as they were, became wanderers again. The monsters were gone, not slain but erased, folded into the frost stillness. For the first time in centuries, there was nothing to hunt. Yet their medallion still trembled. Something beneath the ice still moved. Geralt walked alone through the white wastelands where Kaer Morhen once stood. The keep was gone, swallowed by snow and silence. Only the top of its highest tower remained, jutting out from the ice like a gravestone. He ran his hand across the frozen stone, and for a moment he thought he could hear the laughter of children, Witcher trainees long dead, echoing from another timeline. The world was not destroyed, only rearranged. Cities lay buried under glaciers, mountains rose where seas had been, and in the coldest corners the light behaved strangely, bending, pulsing, as if the air itself remembered being alive. No gods answered prayers, no magic obeyed words. The world had been rewritten without syntax, but not all was lost. In the ruins of Sintra, beneath a sky that refused to warm, a girl with ashen hair was seen walking through the frost, leaving no footprints. Some said it was a ghost. Others swore it was her, the Lady of the New Dawn. They said wherever she passed, the ice cracked just enough for grass to breathe again. The frost retreated, if only for moments, as though even the end of the world remembered her name. The mages who had survived the Conjunction Reborn tried to rebuild, but their magic no longer worked as it once had. Spells dissolved into whispers, potions froze before they could boil. The laws of power had changed, rewritten by the choice Ciri made within the tower. Now the source of all energy pulsed not in the air, but in memory. To cast magic, one had to remember the warmth that once was, and most could not. It was said that the frost had not killed chaos, it had purified it. No longer wild and raw, it now slumbered in the bones of the world, waiting for those who could hear its song again. Geralt found one such place, a lake frozen clear as glass, deep within what had once been Redania. Under the ice, faint light flickered, a heartbeat too slow to belong to any living thing. He knelt, touched the surface, and the frost beneath his hand rippled outward like water. For a moment he saw her reflection, not as he remembered her, but as something else, ageless, calm, watching. He whispered her name. The reflection smiled, then vanished. The Witcher stood there until the cold no longer bit. Then he turned and walked away, leaving only a single mark in the snow, a silver medallion pressed into the ice, its wolf's head facing the horizon. Generations later, when the frost finally began to melt, children would find that medallion, and when they held it to their ears, they claimed they could hear a heartbeat inside, a rhythm slow and patient, the same hum that once gave birth to magic, to chaos, to the witches themselves. And in that faint sound the world began again. At first the silence was perfect, too perfect. The world lay frozen beneath its own reflection, a mirror of white and shadow, a monument to stillness. But even Pichamar has a heartbeat. It began as a faint hum beneath the ice, a vibration too low for the ear, but strong enough to stir the bones of mountains. The frost, once still and absolute, began to shimmer. Tiny fractures spread across the endless white, glowing faintly from within, as if something beneath the world were remembering how to breathe. The frost had ended, but the memory of chaos had not. For centuries, chaos had been shaped by words, by will, by the laws of those who thought they could own it. Now, free of mages, free of order, it began to move on its own. It did not roar or strike. It sang, softly, patiently, in tones older than creation. The song echoed through the cracks of the new world, awakening what had long been buried. The first to hear it were not sorcerers or kings, they were wanderers, those who had nothing left to lose, a hunter in the far north who saw fire bloom beneath ice, a mother who dreamed of her dead child and awoke with her hands glowing blue, a boy who whispered to the wind and found that it whispered back. Magic was returning, but it was not the same. It no longer flowed through formula or incantation. It moved through memory. Each spell, each spark, was born not from knowledge but emotion, from grief, longing, love, fear. The frost had stripped away language and left only essence. Those who could still feel deeply enough became its first vessels. The witches sensed it too. Their medallions, long sequent, began to tremble again. But this was no call to battle. It was recognition, a reminder of what they had once been forged from, chaos distilled and disciplined. The balance they had lived by, between man and monster, will and instinct, was stirring again. Geralt, though older now, walked the new world like a shadow among ruins. He saw things growing where nothing should, flowers blooming through frost, creatures made of light and memory, ghosts of cities rebuilding themselves from reflections. The world was remembering its shape, not as it was, but as it could be. He came upon a child one night, sitting by the frozen edge of a lake. The boy's eyes shone faintly silver, and in his palm danced a spark of raw chaos, wild yet calm, as if listening to its own rhythm. Geralt knelt beside him. "Who taught you that?" The boy smiled. "No one," he said. "It's always been there. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." And in that moment Geralt understood. The frost had not ended the world. It had reset it. The rules were gone, but the melody remained. And now a new generation would learn to dance to it. Far away, beyond the frozen plains, a figure watched from the horizon, a woman wrapped in white, her hair like sunlight through snow. She raised her hand once, and the stars above flickered, aligning themselves into a pattern unseen since the First Age. Then she whispered, "Not the end. The echo." The next morning, where her footprints had melted the frost, single flower grew, its petals silver, its scent like lightning before rain, the first sign of life reborn. And so from silence came song again, from frost, fire, from the end of chaos, its echo. He wakes before dawn, as he always has. Old habits like scars never fade. The world outside his shelter is quiet. Not the heavy silence of death, but the soft hush of renewal. The air carries warmth again. Snow melts in thin rivulets across the rocks, revealing moss, stone, and the faint shimmer of green. The frost is dying, and he remains, Geralt of Rivia, the last of his kind, the final witcher. Once a hunter of monsters, now a relic of a world that no longer fears them. The medallion around his neck no longer hums for contracts or danger, it trembles for memory. Every vibration a reminder of voices long gone, brothers turned to ghosts, wars fought for causes already erased by time. He wanders still, not for gold, not for glory, but because movement itself feels like life. The continent has changed. Cities have thawed but never rebuilt. The rivers have returned, but they flow through new valleys, carving new maps. And the people, those who survived, no longer tell stories of monsters in the dark. They tell stories of him. To some, he is myth. A white-haired ghost walking between ruins, eyes like amber, moving as if time itself avoids him. To others, he is a warning, a relic of an age when men tried to master what they didn't understand, but to a few, to those who remember the world before the frost, he is hope, the last guardian of the balance. He finds the child again by the lake, the same boy from the night of the echo, now older, stronger, his silver eyes steady. The boy greets him with a nod and says, "The world doesn't need witches anymore." Geralt studies him, then smiles faintly. "No," he says, "but it still needs watchers." They sit in silence, the kind that feels like peace. Above them the sun rises weak but sure, painting gold over white. The boy speaks again. "Is it true that before the frost you killed monsters for coin?" Geralt's gaze drifts to the horizon. "Yes," he says, "but most of them wore faces." He leaves the boy a gift, a sword dulled by time, its edge cracked, its silver tarnished. not for battle, but remembrance. "Keep it," he says, "so you don't forget what we were." The boy frowns. "What were you?" Geralt looks toward the dawn. "Necessary." He walks on further north, following the last of the snow. Wherever he steps, the ground softens, as if even the earth still recognizes his weight. He finds the ruins of Kaer Morhen once more, now half buried in thawing ice. Wild flowers bloom where fire once burned. He kneels beside the stones and lays his hand upon them. "Still here," he whispers. The medallion on his chest gives one final tremor, then falls still. Far above, the sky flickers, a faint aurora, silver and green, like the trace of a dream. And for a moment, the world seems to bow in silence, because even the New Age remembers its maker. In the centuries that follow, they will call him the last Witcher. Songs will say he walked into the frost and never returned. Others will claim he became part of the earth itself, watching from beneath roots and rivers, ensuring that chaos never again tips too far toward destruction. But the truth, as always, will be simpler. He didn't vanish. He rested. And in the breath between his last heartbeat and the world's next dawn, he finally found what witchers were never meant to have. Peace. Centuries pass. Empires rise and fall again, but slower this time, as if the world has learned to breathe differently. The frost is a memory now, a myth told around fires that never quite burn as bright as they used to. Children listen wide-eyed as elders whisper about the White Queen, the girl who walked between stars and silence, the one who ended the cold by becoming part of it. No one remembers her name anymore, not Ciri, not Ziriel, only the Star Child. They say she watches from the edge of the sky, where the auroras hum softly above the mountains that used to cradle Kaer Morhen. When the wind is just right, you can hear her voice, not speaking but singing, a song without words woven from memory and light, and sometimes the stars answer. The scholars of the New Age call it resonance. The mages who have relearned the old ways call it the Elder Pulse. But the few who still remember the world before the frost know it for what it is, the heartbeat of chaos returning home. For magic never dies. It only forgets, and each time it remembers, it returns stronger, wiser, colder. The people of this age have built their lives around the rhythm of that song. They harness its hum to light their cities, to heal their sick, to shape reality in gentle ways the old mages could never dream of. There are no more wars for control, no more towers built to reach the stars, because the stars now live within them. Yet in the northernmost reaches, where snow still falls even in summer, there is a place untouched by time, a narrow valley lined with the bones of a fortress, Kaer Morhen reborn, not in stone but in reflection. At its centre stands a monument carved from crystal and ice. Upon it, etched in a language no one speaks anymore, is a single line. Monsters were never born, they were made. And below it, a silver medallion, a wolf's head, frozen perfectly in the clear heart of the monument. Its eyes still glimmer faintly as if it too remembers. On some nights, when the auroras flare brightest, a figure appears near that monument, a woman